Okay, this is chapter 1. We're going to start on slide 4 with your PowerPoint, so just follow along. And presently I do not have my textbook, but follow along with your textbook. And hopefully by chapter 2 I will have it back. Okay, so we're going to start on slide 4 on your PowerPoint for chapter 1. We're going to talk about homeostasis. This is maintaining equilibrium. It means all cells, tissues, organs, and systems basically work to maintain equilibrium. If we didn't have that, we would have disease all the time. We would get sick constantly. So our body has to maintain some sort of homeostasis to stay healthy. When we have disease, this is called a disequilibrium because the homeostasis maybe didn't work as good, maybe because we were stressed. Anything like that can make our equilibrium off, and so disease means a disequilibrium. Pathophysiology is a study of the physiological processes leading up to disease. And then we have pathology, the study of disease in general. Okay, so going on to the next slide. You see table 1.1 in your textbook. You do not have to know this for test purposes. It just, kind of gives you something but to go by. But you can see that the leading cause of death in the United States is heart disease. But again, you do not have to know this. So keep on going to the next slide. Okay, this one I do want you to know. This is table 1.2 in your textbook, and it's the major cause of disease. So let's start with the first cause, which is inflammation, autoimmunity, and allergy. So inflammation, all of these, you could have asthma, you could have lupus. The systemic lupus erythematosus is the same thing as lupus for short. You could have HIV, you could have anything like that. Those are just some examples of a disease caused from inflammation or autoimmunity. Okay, the next one, infection. Again, this could be a plethora of different diseases, but they give you tuberculosis and influenza. Neoplasm is any type of cancer, so we have a lung cancer and malignant melanoma. Heredity, this is anything that you're born with that, or I'm sorry, not born with, that your family has. So let's say your grandfather has diabetes, then if you get it, it's considered hereditary more than likely. So examples of hereditary conditions are sickle cell anemia and cystic fibrosis. Okay, malnutrition, another cause of disease. So we can have pernicious anemia, which we'll talk about in a later chapter, but just so you know, pernicious anemia is a decrease in your B12, vitamin B12 count in the body. And then we have iron deficiency anemia, which is basically low red blood cell count. Or a lot of people call it low blood count. And that's iron deficiency anemia. And then, of course, one of the most common causes of disease is stress. So stress can cause high blood pressure, which is hypertension, and it can cause heart disease, believe it or not. Stress can cause major things to happen in your body. Okay, going on to the next slide, we're going to look at the manifestations of disease. And we're going to look at the difference between signs and symptoms. Signs are something that you can physically measure, like your vital signs, blood pressure, temperature, pulse, respiration, things that you can visibly and physically measure. So signs are considered objective evidence of disease observed on physical examination, such as abnormal pulse or respiratory rate, fever, sweating, and pallor. So signs are considered objective, and objective means something that's measurable. And then symptoms are anything that the patient states, but we can't really see or measure it. So if they're saying they're having stomach pain, that's not really anything that we can visibly or physically measure. They may have their hands over their stomach, but we can't really measure to see how much pain they actually truly have. So that's considered subjective. So symptoms are subjective. And again, these are indications of disease reported by the patient, such as pain, dizziness, and itching. Certain sets of signs and symptoms occur concurrently in some diseases, and their combination is referred to as a syndrome. And this is when you get into actually a disease. So let's talk just an example of a syndrome. Let's say diabetes. The signs of diabetes: you may have a high blood glucose level. Symptoms of diabetes may be excessive thirst, etc., or lightheadedness. So those are when you consider to have a syndrome. Okay, going on to the next slide. Let's look at the diagnosis. In order for the doctor or the allied health professional to make a diagnosis, they have to have the nature of the disease, so like a history. When did it start? How long has it been going on? How bad is it? Is it worse in the morning or the evening? And so they have to find out the nature of the disease. This includes signs and symptoms. So have you had vomiting? Have you had constipation, diarrhea, headache, rash, etc., etc.? And then we have the syndrome, which is signs and symptoms at the same time. And then this kind of clues in the physician, well, hey, maybe they have strep throat, maybe they have high cholesterol. So this can definitively, in most cases, lead to a diagnosis. Okay, going on to the next slide. This is just a video here on the topic of diagnosis. I'm not going to play this, obviously, but just listen to it. It's a really short and good video. So going on to the next slide. Again, this is another animation video, and it talks about PET scans. So again, I'm not going to play this one, but do look at it. It's pretty interesting. Okay, going on to the next slide, which is slide 11. This is a syndrome. Syndrome, again, like we said, is signs and symptoms combined. So if we have a symptom, or I'm sorry, let's say we have a sign, which is objective. We have a sign of high blood pressure, decreased oxygenation, dehydration, or dry mucous membranes, and poor skin turgor. Now the reasons those are signs is because I can measure all of them. I can use a blood pressure cuff and measure the blood pressure. I can do a pulse oximeter to measure the oxygenation of the body. Dehydration, I can look to see the skin turgor. If it stays up, then they're dehydrated. If it goes back down, they're pretty well hydrated. I may see that they have dry mouth or dry mucous membranes, so I can visibly measure all of that. And then the symptoms that go along with it are dizziness, shortness of breath, nausea, and vomiting. I can't physically measure if somebody's dizzy. That's why it's a symptom. I can't physically measure if somebody's short of breath. They may be gasping for breath, but I cannot measure that. And then I can't measure nausea and vomiting. So those are all subjective or symptoms.